state. In fact, in the late 1700s, our forebears in the Universalist Church were some of the voices calling for the disestablishment of the state-sponsored churches of the Standing Order in New England. You see, at that time, everybody had to pay taxes to support the Congregational Church in their city or town, whether or not they attended it or were members of it. And for some odd reason, Universalists, along with Baptists and Quakers, thought that that wasn't quite right. Go figure. If I had to guess, I would bet that Reverend Lynn has spoken at hundreds of Unitarian Universalist congregations in the course of his 25 years as executive director. Because you see, one of the founding tenets of Unitarian Universalism is freedom of conscience. The right of every person to believe or not believe, according to the dictates of their own moral and spiritual discernment, and free from coercion of any kind. Other foundational principles of our faith tradition are the belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every single person, no exceptions, and the imperative to treat everyone with justice and equity. And as we have seen too many times over the course of history, these principles can be and have been compromised whenever and wherever the state favors or supports one religious tradition over another. Americans United and the Unitarian Universalist Association have over and over again allied on the same side in legislative battles and court cases when religious liberty is in jeopardy. Unitarian Universalists understand that religious freedom is the cornerstone for freedom of every sort. Nancy Friedman, president of the Houston chapter of Americans United, will be introducing the Reverend Lynn. So let me just conclude my remarks by thanking you all for coming this evening, and again reiterating that it is indeed an honor to be hosting this event. Welcome.
Hello everyone, as Becky said, I'm Nancy Friedman, president of the Houston chapter of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, united for a really good cause. In 1947, Americans United was founded. It was founded to defend the principle of church-state separation. We believe that that's the only way to ensure religious freedom for all of us, for those who believe and those who don't believe. The only way to ensure religious freedom for all Americans. Today, Americans United is the only national organization that works full-time, devoting all of its resources to supporting this principle. Although this principle actually has wide-reaching effects, because if the government intrudes on someone's expression or practice of their religious beliefs, or if the government tries to institutionalize some specific religious beliefs, as we've seen recently, then all of us could suffer. Individually, our neighbors could suffer. The causes that we care about might be affected. We've all seen this in issues ranging from healthcare to education, to social justice, to equality. We are here, Americans United, celebrating our 70th anniversary. And there have been a lot of accomplishments, but it's really not a night to sit back and celebrate because, as I said, especially recently, we've seen so much going on both in Texas and in Washington, D.C. It is an affront to our religious liberty. So much to be worried about that we really don't have time to rest and to celebrate. So tonight, we have two members of our national staff with us. They are going to talk about Americans United past, But they're also going to talk about the present and the future of the organization, because it's important that we celebrate not only what AU has done for the past 70 years, but frankly, because of what's going on now, I think it's just as important that we celebrate the fact that AU is still here today, fighting for all of us. Because if AU weren't here fighting for us, well, I'm not really sure. I think a lot of the policies that we've seen people want to implement in the State House in Austin and Congress and the White House in Washington, D.C. might not be checked as they are now. Our Executive Director, Barry Lynn, is retiring after 25 years of heading our organization. Now, I could spend a lot of time telling you about all the wonderful things he's accomplished, but as one of our members said, she's here tonight because she wants to fangirl over our rock star, Barry Lynn. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time telling you about his accomplishments. What I think we can all look forward to, though, is one thing about Reverend Lynn, he's always full of interesting insights, witty stories, and I think as he reflects on his career tonight, I trust we'll hear a lot of those. After Reverend Lynn speaks, we're going to hear from AU's faith organizer, Bill Mefford. Now, Reverend Lynn is retiring after 25 years in Americans United. Bill Mefford is just starting out his career there. He's been there a little over a year. But he holds an important distinction, and that is, you know, everything has to come back to Texas, right? He grew up in Texas, and he went to college in Texas. So I had to work that into his introduction, and maybe he'll work that in too. And then after Bill Mefford speaks, we're going to have questions and answers, and then finally we will open it up to a reception. Invite all of you to stay afterwards and enjoy refreshments with us, mingle with the chapter board members, mingle with Reverend Lynn and Mr. Mefford, and enjoy yourselves. Now, one thing I do want to ask you, you're probably all aware that there's an Astros game tonight, and I do appreciate those of you who are Astros fans coming out tonight. So I want to ask that I want to ask you to keep your phone on, turned off like I would if you were here, if you were in the theater. But what I will ask is that you refrain from cheering or booing or anything like that during the game, because my husband learned today how to record the game so I can go watch it when I get home. And I don't want you to spoil it for me. So I would appreciate if you hear the story, you please keep it to yourself. Otherwise, thanks for coming, and we'll get to talk to you at the end of the program.
Thank you all for coming. It's very difficult these days to talk about any legal or moral issue without mentioning the man who is the President of the United States. Now, I have some friends who wake up every morning and they immediately go to a Twitter hashtag that says, "Not my president." The only problem with that is he is everybody's president, whether we like it or not, and we've got to learn to deal with it. There could be some unpleasant things that I tell you about the president, and just to be fair, I just wanted to spend a little time mentioning the things that Donald Trump has done that have, in fact, made America a better place. It's really hard to do that. I don't think that President Trump really understands statecraft, and I don't think he understands religion. But let me start with religion. I happened to be out in Iowa for the weekend before the Iowa caucuses. I was a theologian, visiting theologian at a United Church of Christ out there in Ames, Iowa. And I did a whole weekend of activities and talked to people, and this happened to be the week right after Donald Trump made his very first visit to the late Jerry Falwell's Liberty University. I had never seen Donald Trump with notes. Usually he spoke off the cuff and tweeted, of course, but he didn't. But he had little note cards, and he said that he and Jerry Falwell's son, Jerry Falwell Jr., had spent some time before he addressed the students there, talking about their favorite Bible verses. So he picked up a note card, and he said that this was one of his favorite verses from the book 2 Corinthians. Now, there is not any Christian who would actually refer to that book as 2 Corinthians, but again, people ridiculed for a week, they ridiculed him. And I wanted to say, well, let's cut him a break. Maybe he was telling a joke. 2 Corinthians and 1 Philippian walk into a bar. So I got that kind of reaction back in Ames, Iowa. And so I went to the question and answer period, and there was a fellow in the back row. He stood up and he said, "Barry, hey, what's the end of that joke?" Now, I hope there's nobody from Iowa here, but that event alone, that question, made me wonder why it is that Iowa, of all places, gets to make the first judgment in the country about who will be the presidential candidate of both political parties. He didn't learn a lot about religion after he became president either. Some months ago, we had National Day of Prayer. National Day of Prayer is a day set aside as the first Thursday in May by congressional action. National Day of Prayer. And I've always wondered about National Day of Prayer because I don't understand what you're supposed to do on National Day of Prayer if you are a regular person who prays. Are we supposed to pray longer? Better? Perhaps in another language? Who knows? But he brought to the White House all of these theologians and preachers and television preachers, and I'm sure he actually would have invited me, but I think the envelope was lost in the mail. And he came out to the Rose Garden and he said, "You know, every president in modern history has declared National Day of Prayer, but how many of you actually have been here in the Rose Garden on National Day of Prayer?" Because everybody knows the real test of a person's faith is the grandiosity by which it is practiced. Now, he only had about 4 rows of people, and he was talking about all of this, and he said that there were some people in the audience from Little Sisters of the Poor. And he said Little Sisters of the Poor, that why the Obama administration sued them, which was not true. But he said, "No, where are the sisters?" There were only 4 rows of people. There were 3 women in habits, very traditional. And finally, he said, "There are the sisters." Now, there were some other people in the audience. There were 2 people off to his left with long beards. One was an Orthodox rabbi, and the other was a patriarch of the Orthodox Church. And I was a little embarrassed. I wondered, would he mention those people too? And say something like, "Oh, and over in the corner, members of the ZZ Top Band are here."
Oh, that's bad.
I know it's bad. It's terrible. It's terrible to think that. But I just want to, I felt sorry for him if he would have made such a terrible mistake. A lot of people don't like a lot of things that he does, a lot of the individual things that he announces every day. He wants to get rid of the dreamers. He wants to build that wall with Mexico, even if we have to temporarily pay for it ourselves. He says these things, and we don't like it. But what I really don't like is that I believe this president and his administration are really trying to undo democracy in America. That they are trying to do away with or dramatically alter the very institutions that make 2 things possible: change and the democratic process. And that's what I'd really like to spend some time talking about today. I don't think that we can look at the agenda of this administration without realizing that he wants major changes in the institutions that for many of us made all the difference in our lives. And let's start with public schools. He has spent an incredible amount of his time and effort so far trying to privatize education in America. He appointed a Secretary of Education, of course, a woman who literally, I don't think she's ever been in a public school she likes, because of course Betsy DeVos has rarely been in a public school at all. She has spent her entire career trying to privatize education. She doesn't know that much about public schools, but she is bound and determined to get rid of them. I saw Donald Trump once at a campaign rally when he talked about this issue of school choice, of vouchers for public education, for private education to replace public education. He had an audience of 4,000 evangelicals. And he said, you know, this is the big civil rights issue of the 21st century. We have to make sure that African American students have the same opportunities as white students do. And there was a little polite applause. But I found that the evangelical conservatives do not really care what's going on with people of color in this country or minority communities generally. And then he said, but those school vouchers will also be used for homeschooling. And then they went crazy, absolutely berserk, because they want to get money from the government so they can teach their children at home, subsidized by the federal government. School vouchers are a controversy that was going on at the time that Americans United was founded 70 years ago. One of the first cases we were involved in is when the Archdiocese of Albuquerque, New Mexico, went to the public schools out there that were having some financial trouble and said, you know, we got an idea. Why don't we send the sisters from some of our Catholic schools over to the public schools? They can teach. You don't even have to pay them. Well, a lot of people in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the time were not Catholic. They might have been Protestants, they might have been members of other faiths, or have no religious background at all, and they were quite upset about this. So they called Americans United, which had just been founded, and this was the first lawsuit with which we had been active. And these things are still going on today, but now we know a lot more about school choice, about alternatives to public education. And one of the things we ought to know is that if your only measure of success is whether these improve the academic performance of young people, we now know the answer is no. In the District of Columbia, which is the beneficiary of about $20 million of tax funds that are sent into schools in the form of school vouchers, the Congress has allowed, during the Obama administration and even before that, studies to be made of the effectiveness of school vouchers. And they did 3 major studies, scientific studies. They found out that in all 3 instances, there was no academic improvement. All this was a way to funnel to primarily religious schools a vast amount of tax dollars. Then, in the spring of this year, they were about to release, and did release, the 4th study, which reached exactly the same conclusion. It happened that a week later, the House of Representatives was debating the merits of sending another $20 million to the school voucher program. In spite of this, the 4th study, Washington tended to do what Washington sometimes does. It, of course, refinanced the program again in spite of 4 studies of failure. And then, just to add icing to this grotesque cake, they decided not to permit the scientific study of the effectiveness of school vouchers again. So, don't bother me with the facts, don't bother me with the evidence, and of course, we're going to spend more money doing what doesn't work in the past. When the Secretary of Education testified a couple times before the Congress, she seemed unaware of the fact that public schools have a requirement to take care of persons with disabilities, students with disabilities. She didn't seem to understand that there was something called Title IX of the Civil Rights Act that calls for a rough equivalency between the funding of men and women's sports, even at the high school level, something that has opened up scholarships for young women in colleges and universities all over the country. Those are not requirements of school voucher programs in the District of Columbia or anywhere else. They are free to ignore civil rights laws at the same time that they are taking your money and mine. Public schools are where I learned how to interact with people who are not like myself. I grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. It was a socially segregated community. I didn't interact with people of different religion race, nothing. Then I went to high school. We had a high school that was so big, it was bigger than most of the schools in Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. 1,100 students in my high school graduating class. And I got to know the community itself. I got to interact with students and teachers who didn't look like me, they didn't look like my parents, they didn't think necessarily like myself. And I got to meet them. And that's when public education works the best. It becomes a melting pot of all kinds of ideologies and backgrounds of races and religions, and it makes change possible. I changed my attitudes dramatically when I had that experience. When you do away with public schools, when you do away with them by privatizing them and turning those schools into places where only Catholics go to school or only persons of one race go to school, you haven't improved public education. You've just helped to destroy it. Public schools were integrated in 1954, in theory, by the Brown versus Board of Education decision. But there were a couple of states, including Louisiana, that decided they were going to find a way to subsidize private schools because those private schools wanted to remain all white. And those all-white academies were granted funds by the state of Louisiana. Federal courts did step in. They said this was not permissible. So the next time you hear somebody in the administration talking about how this is the civil rights issue of the 21st century, just consider it fake news. So if you get rid of the public schools, how about the courts? The courts are extremely important. We know that in the last couple of years we've had a lot of 5-4 decisions by the United States Supreme Court in a good way. Good voting rights decisions, good decisions on marriage equality, good decisions eliminating burdens on women seeking to obtain abortions or contraception. 5-4 decisions, but now with just one new member of the court, Neil Gorsuch from the 10th Circuit up in the Dakotas and elsewhere, he gets appointed to the United States Supreme Court from a list of 22 people that have been fully vetted by the Judicial Crisis Network that runs these ads, right-wing ads on television, and also the Heritage Foundation. 22. He was the first off the list, and I watched him his first week. He will not be the friend of church-state separation. He certainly wasn't in the 10th Circuit. He's not going to be on the Supreme Court. So my fear is there will be more 4 to 5 decisions, and they will not be decisions that most, if not all, of the people in this room like. He has now the opportunity to fill many, 100 federal appeals court vacancies left during the Obama administration. They will all come from that list of 22 people. I think when he issued that list last summer, he was expecting Hillary Clinton to issue another list, and then they could have what Supreme Court appointments have tended to be, a whole battle again over the nature of the country and the directions that the courts would take. She didn't follow up with that. She didn't do that, and I think that was to her credit. But now we know that that 22-member list exists. They're starting to take some of the people off the list and use them to fill those federal circuit court vacancies, and a vast majority, something like 98% of cases, are resolved at that level. They never get to the United States Supreme Court. And there's some doozy people that are on that list. And the one that's gotten a lot of publicity lately is a woman who's at Notre Dame, a professor at Notre Dame Law School named Amy Barrett. Amy Barrett has written in a law journal that she believes that the duty of judges is first to obey God and second to turn to the Constitution. I was out in California when this news first broke, and Dianne Feinstein had dared to ask her at a confirmation hearing whether she still agreed with that position that she had articulated in a law review article. And then she was attacked by people from the right wing of American politics on and off of the Judiciary Committee, and said that she had no right to ask a question like that. because that was somehow an insult to someone's religion, and she should just not mention it at all. Now, usually you can get maybe one Democrat to ask the question of people who seem to have this kind of background: can you separate your religious beliefs from your duties as a federal judge? And sometimes, and people usually say yes. But here, Dianne Feinstein wasn't even allowed to ask the question, even though the answer had been previously published by Professor Barrett. These are the kinds of people that will be filling the courts. To the extent that they get anything done in Congress, they will get this done, because it only takes, of course, one House, the Senate, and a simple majority to get people onto all of these federal courts, including the Supreme Court. And there are a lot of issues that are going to come up that are going to be very important. In this term, we'll look at the immigration ban. We filed a lawsuit a couple weeks ago in conjunction with the Southern Poverty Law Center, Muslim advocates and other groups, challenging what is now the third ban on Muslim immigration to the United States. The administration says it's not an immigration ban, in spite of the fact that candidate Trump talked about this all the time. He once, maybe you remember this, said, you know, it's so hard to distinguish Muslims from terrorists that we ought to make sure that we limit immigration. He continues to use that phrase during his early days as a candidate. He continues to use it as litigation is occurring around the country. Of course, if you identify countries, and they all happen to be Muslim majority countries, you're going to have a disproportionate effect on Muslim immigration. On the third one, he said, well, wait, we're going to expand it. We're going to limit immigration from Venezuela and from North Korea. Well, North Korea, there is no immigration from North Korea. And Venezuela, it only affects the family of the president of Venezuela, who is out of favor with Donald Trump's administration. So it's the same thing. Every court that has looked at the two previous bans has called them bans, has said they violate the principle of not treating some religions differently than others, and have declared them unconstitutional. There will be a case this term. One of these cases will get to the Supreme Court, and I don't think that Neil Gorsuch will make a decision that we're going to like. There's another case, Masterpiece Bakery. You may have seen this gentleman, Jack Phillips, the baker in this case, on television. He's been kind of doing the rounds. He's on The View, he's everywhere. And he didn't like the idea of same-sex marriage. In fact, he said he can't do it. He can't bake a cake for two gentlemen that ironically had not gotten married in their home state of Colorado because marriage equality wasn't legal there. They had gone to Massachusetts where it was legal. They got married. Several days later, they wanted to have a party back in Colorado. Jack Phillips said, not baking you folks a cake. During the deposition taken in the early phases of that case, one of the lawyers for the Human Rights Commission said to Mr. Phillips, have you ever been asked to bake any other memorable pastries? And he said, I was once asked to bake a wedding cake for 2 dogs. And they said, well, did you do it? He said, of course. Now think about this. The holy sacrament of marriage now is treated in such an offhanded fashion that he actually would bake a cake for 2 dogs. And that dog weddings apparently are more important to Jack Phillips than 2 men or 2 women who want to get married in this country. We know Neil Gorsuch is not going to be a fan of that either, because Neil Gorsuch had decided cases involving this very question. What is the difference between a claim that you are going to be, you're supposed to be a publicly available service, and what are you going to do if that abuts your claim of religious freedom? And our vice president, of course, got into a little trouble with that, Mike Pence, when he was the governor of Indiana. When he was the governor of Indiana, there was an effort made to continue to require, as state law did in some counties in Indiana, that you serve everyone. One day I was sitting in the office, we were watching a little statement, press conference that was being held in Indiana by a woman who ran a pizzeria. She was on to announce that she would not mind serving a gay couple if they came into her pizzeria, but she certainly would not cater a gay couple's wedding. Now, we have many gay people and lesbians on our staff, and they all looked at each other, and almost to a person, out of their mouth came, if we got pizza at our wedding, we would lose our gay card. And I thought, well, that's an interesting point. And I was kind of irritated by that, and I had the great pleasure, actually, doing the wedding for my daughter some years ago, and I looked at the bill for the dinner, and I thought,
pizza.
Why not pizza? Why not pizza? Amen. Amen. That's right. So we got a big problem. These are cases that are all in the pipeline right now. Once this decision in Masterpiece Bakery is made by the United States Supreme Court, it's going to be argued in a few weeks, we have the possibility of allowing all this discriminatory conduct to occur against LGBT people in this country, even if there are laws that say you have to serve everyone. So there's a couple that is not allowed to stay in a bed and breakfast in Hawaii. Another couple in New Mexico just wanted a person to take photographs of their wedding, and the photographer said no. So all of these are percolating up, and they'll all be resolved by the United States Supreme Court this year. So that's a problem. And then how about the third big institution that the Trump administration doesn't seem to like, and that is the voting system in the United States. And they don't like it in a couple of ways. Number one, why do you think they're trying to keep people from Central America and Mexico from immigrating to the United States? It's because unless you're immigrating from Cuba, where there's some difference of political opinion, if you're immigrating from Central America or Mexico, the purpose is you want to come to the United States, you want to become a citizen, and if you vote, you will vote Democratic. And if the 38 votes in this state, electoral votes, all of a sudden turned blue regularly, there would never be another Donald Trump elected president of the United States. And he knows that. And how about this? Whoa. I think I have done damage to you, or
It's not hooked up.
it's okay.
It's okay.
Hey, Jerry, you know that. You know that in this state, and a lot of other states. I was in North Carolina. It looked like it was going to become a great progressive place in the South. And the last time I was there a year and a half ago, it looked like it was another country. And it's because of gerrymandering. And it's by the Koch brothers and their supporters. They literally changed that state's politics. And they want to do the same, and they want it to be allowed. I was worried before the Supreme Court even opened its term, the first Monday in October, that they had put on hold two very good decisions made by lower courts about how race-based drawing of districts at the state and federal level were wrong, unconstitutional. The Supreme Court put both of them on hold. A few weeks ago they heard a gerrymandering case, and there's a difference of opinion about how that will go. But if you are able to cut these boundaries in any way that benefits some people and not others, you have erased decades of progress in many states in the United States. The final thing he wants to do with the voting situation is allow churches to endorse candidates for public office. This is something called the Johnson Amendment. Somebody said I'm getting some kind of a notice of the most important tax lawyer of the year or something, because I've been fighting to retain the Johnson Amendment for a long time. Johnson Amendment just says if you are any church, any synagogue, any mosque, any charity at all, you cannot endorse or oppose candidates for public office. Very simple, very conservative. We have gotten through our wonderful legislative team in Washington that working with both good government groups, religious groups, not only 4,000 ministers around the country and imams and others to say, don't change the law. We don't want to be able to endorse candidates. But a staggering number, I think it's 5,000 secular charities from all parts of the country, national ones, local ones, writing to their elected officials, signing petitions saying, we don't want this. Because they don't want to be asked in exchange for their endorsement. They don't want the lure of that money. Not if you're a church, not if you're a bird watching society, not if you're a cancer society. They don't want that. And the other thing you have to think about, and this is why the good government groups are involved, let's say the 5 people in the front row decide to form a church. And the first thing you have to do is just say you're a church. You don't even have to file papers with the federal government. You just get a tax exemption. It's one of the hundreds of benefits that you get if you happen to be a religious organization in this country. And let's say the person in the last row says, hey, I like that church they founded. Let me just give $1 million to this church. Now, the church that never has to report that they got $1 million from somebody else in this room, they never have to report it. And in fact, under many circumstances, the donor never ends up reporting either that he or she gave $1 million. So this is a gigantic money laundering scheme in addition to being a clear inhibition of the right of churches to be prophetic when they choose to be prophetic, to speak power to any government and not have to fear losing a benefit, a tax exemption, or the money that they might otherwise get. This is bad stuff. When you start to change public education by destroying it, when you start to change the federal judiciary by making it ideologically pure by right-wing standards, and when you try to change the very pattern of voting itself by adding all of these provisions to the law and letting this happen, you are in trouble. If there were enough time, I'd talk about some other things, and I just want to mention them in case you have any questions about it. There are 3 other ways in which we change America. One of them is we change America through science. You know, we take evidence seriously. This administration does not. We have a head of the Environmental Protection Agency who believes that he's not sure if heavy metals in water cause brain damage in children. I mean, this is something that every serious scientist does. They're reintroducing toxic chemicals to kill pest birds that have been outlawed since the publication of Silent Spring. There is no debate about this. There's no debate. They have eliminated scientific advisory panels on everything from climate change to introduction of these toxic materials. They don't just appoint people that are in the industry, they do away with the panels to discuss it in the first place. If you don't have science, we had 2 young women who worked in our office. One was a law fellow, and one was a writer who's now writing for the New Republic. And both of them had been homeschooled. And on separate times, we'd sit around, and both of them said, you know, when we were homeschooled, we never heard the word evolution. Never heard it. And then, because they were both, as their parents would say, allowed them to go to college, they heard about evolution. And they said, you know, that's not a bad idea. It sounds legitimate. They change their mind. But if you don't allow people, because they're not in a public school, or you don't allow science to do the purposeful job that it has, no changes occur. Donald Trump wants to zero out the National Endowment for the Arts. When you think about the way that the arts change people, it's pretty magnificent. Think about Uncle Tom's Cabin. If that hadn't been published, would we have had as strong an abolitionist movement at the time that it was necessary for somebody to get it started? Think back of the Civil Rights era. All that gospel-infused music that became the folk songs of the 1960s made a huge difference. It was a unifying force. It made people wake up, think about a world that was different than the world they were in, and it made a difference. In the Depression, it wasn't just theoretical. Roosevelt actually paid people to write poems, paid people to take photographs. All of that stuff is available. It was paid for, and it showed the rest of America who hadn't noticed the enormous disparity between the rich and the poor in the times of the Depression. It made a big deal of difference. And finally, just last week, you may have seen that he announced that he thought the networks that were so filled with false news, fake news, maybe they shouldn't even have television licenses anymore. They shouldn't have television licenses. If we don't have, look, I have a lot of problems with the press in America today, but if you don't have a free press, you have no chance to what? To alter the way people think about issues. And he has the nerve to talk about stripping licenses from the news broadcasters that he doesn't like. This is all pretty bad stuff, because if you do all this stuff and it happens, we're up a very bad place. Well, that's all depressing. What can we do? I got some ideas. I mean, I don't think these are genius ideas. I just think they're good ideas. Voter registration, that's really important. You know what's more important than voter registration? Getting the registered voters to show up at the polls. If you have a neighbor that you think might not be able to because he or she is too old, or has a disease, or has some, take them to the polls. If you know millennials who are in college but who are renting an apartment near where you live and they might not know where the polling place is, take them there. There are some states organize getting people to the polls who are already registered voters. That is a great idea. When you look at the difference, you know, I saw a picture of Al Franken today. I think he eventually, he's very good as a senator. He got over not thinking he could be funny and be a senator at the same time. But he won by, I think, 85 votes. He's going to be up again, but 85 votes. 85 votes. Look at these numbers in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania. If you like the results, fine. But if you didn't like the results, think about what could have been done to get people who were registered out to the polls. Nancy talks a lot about binding people together and organizations together in coalitions, and that's also incredibly important. My experience, though, is sometimes we form coalitions, certainly at the national level, and we want people to be in the coalitions, but then we don't want to give them any credit for doing anything. And that's a big mistake. If they were good enough to get into your coalition, then they're good enough to be sure they are always mentioned as a part of that coalition, that they are given credit for the work that they do, no matter how small that organization might be in your community or at the national level. So let's form coalitions and let's give them credit where it's due. If you contact your elected officials, you know, of course, you know, you can't contact them by sending them letters anymore, because it takes forever for a letter to get delivered to the Congress, because they're still irradiating that because of the anthrax scare. But you write emails and you wonder, does that make any difference? When you look at statistics, 14% of Americans are the only percentage of Americans that ever contact any elected official about any topic. Can you imagine if everybody in this room decided you're going to take a vote on what to write to your elected officials about tomorrow? They'd think there was some kind of revolution happening right in this part of Houston, Texas. And they would listen. And people say, well, does it make any difference? Well, the first email doesn't make any difference, but if you get 10 emails, it does start to make a difference. If you get 100 emails, that member, even if that's a United States senator, that person's going to go to someone on their staff and say, what is this issue? And they're going to have an answer for it. And you're going to have some input on what that answer should be. So this idea that it doesn't make any difference to write to members of Congress, members of the local city council, members of anything else, is baloney. It's fake theory. What you need to do is contact them. And if they're doing good things, say thank you. That's a good thing. If they're doing bad things, you know, we have such a, I have so many great politicians in the state of Maryland where I live that I was speaking to a group of about 150 people, and I said, you know, it's kind of, I wish I could, you know, there are just moments when you wish that the person who was representing you in Congress was as terrible as some of the people around the country, because then you could go to their public meetings if they have them and yell at them. What if they're just in the middle? You know, what if they're okay people, but they don't work too hard? We need champions. You need champions. You need people who are going to stand up for the issues that matter and connect issues and recognize that issues are connected, that you can't look at issues like the separation of church and state and ignore the impact that it has on voting, ignore what it means about the judiciary, or what it means about all the other issues you care about. Sometimes you can seek perfection. You know, get somebody who's 80% right. It's not a bad idea to say, why aren't you 100% right? Finally, I really think we have to understand better how to react to the nonsense that we hear from the right wing in this country. I have made a pledge that, and I keep it almost every day. 10 minutes I watch the Fox News channel. 10 minutes. You know, no matter what is happening on CNN and MSNBC and the traditional networks, Fox News is going to be talking about something else. And they're going to be explaining it in a different way. And they're going to be talking about, they're still talking about Benghazi. They're still talking about Hillary's emails. They are not talking about the issues that do in fact matter and that are covered by every other news outfit in this country. When I retire, I used to say I was going to reduce that to 5 minutes a day watching the Fox News channel, but I've changed my mind. I think I'm going to be having a little extra time. I'm going to watch 15 minutes of the Fox News channel. I know I could be in bad shape after that. I want to know the arguments. I did talk radio a lot. I did it with Oliver North. I did it with Pat Buchanan. You understand their arguments best, and but if you don't know it, you know, you watch the people on Fox, and they make these screwy arguments, and you go, is that true? And you know it's not true, but do you have the evidence to back up why it is not true? And there are people that can do that, and there are organizations that can give you other information, but you have to be prepared. You have to know what their arguments are so that you can rebut those arguments, because the truth really is on the side of the people in this room. The truth matters. It is not up for grabs, and you know what it is. I said to a few people a few minutes before we started here that I of course never liked that hat, "Make America Great Again," because I don't think we ever were great. I was annoyed when Secretary Clinton started to respond to that hat by saying, no, we're great already. Because we know that's not true. We know that is not true. We know that the people in this room, though, have sought probably most of your lives to make America great, to make sure that nobody is a second-class citizen based on race or gender or ideology in this country. It's the people who make a difference. All due respect to the politicians, there are a couple of politicians here. They're great politicians. Shirley Chisholm came up. She was the first woman I ever voted for President of the United States. I mean, that was a great feeling. Shirley Chisholm. All these people made a difference, but none of them really started out as anything but activists. They wanted to change their communities, and then they became elected, and then they were in a position to do it more. And I think that is the great glory of having coalitions all over the country. I was in Chicago last weekend. I was in St. Louis before that. I'm going up to Rochester. I'm part of this tour. I don't have a t-shirt, you know, black t-shirt. Barry Lynn tour. But it's the folks here that make all the difference. And I hope you understand that, and I hope you continue to do it. And I hope you find more people and more connections to do it with on the issues that really matter to all of us and to generations to come. I want to get Bill up here to say a few words, and then we'll take a few questions. And you know, I did that talk radio, so if you have questions for me, I will just make up the answers.
So I was joking with Nancy that having me follow Barry is kind of like having you two open for Gomer Pyle. So I am Gomer Pyle. My name is Bill Befford. I've been at AU for about a year and a half. I just want to say one or two things real quick. The good thing is the future takes a lot less time than the past and the present. But I do want to update you. The former Houston Oilers are losing to the Indianapolis Colts 10-6. 10-9. Okay. So I came to AU. I worked for about a decade at the National Office of the United Methodist Church. Worked on issues of mass incarceration, immigration, gun violence, those kinds of things. So when I came to AU, I'd had some experience working in DC, worked as a national community organizer with the United Methodists. And one of the things, there's a bunch of things, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the work of AU. AU has a big legal staff where we're engaging in legal issues through the courts, joining other existing lawsuits, starting lawsuits of our own for people, for real people who are actually harmed by the misuse of religion, the use of religion to harm other people. So I'd known about AU's legal staff and the tremendous work they'd had. I'd actually worked closely with the legislative staff, and I want to say something real quick about our legislative team. Washington, D.C. is filled with smart people. Smart people, and then members of Congress. But AU's legislative staff are among the smartest people I think I've ever met, and they're incredibly gifted. And it really is an honor to work with a staff that really is, I think, the best at what they do in the entire nation. So it's been an honor for me to be there. I work with the field department, and I want to say one thing: with all that Barry has described, and one thing that I'm glad he pointed out that I really want to emphasize: not only does it seem like, and is it an actuality, that this administration seems intent on undoing democracy, this is also an administration that is intent on undoing the things that President Barack Obama did himself. This is as much about race and racism and white supremacy as it is about anything else. Make America Great Again is simply about a repudiation of the reality that we live in a multicultural society with lots of people who from lots of different parts of the world, and there are some white people who simply cannot handle it. And that's what this whole election, that's what this whole administration has been about. It is racist to the core. And so when we respond to it, it's not only necessary for us to respond through the excellence of folks at AU, folks at ACLU, other folks, partners that we work with through the court system, which we are. It's not only absolutely imperative that we fight this in the legislative halls, both in Washington, D.C. and in Austin. Seems like you guys have had a few things to do this year. But it's also, it's absolutely imperative that we build organizations of power, that we make alliances, that we reflect the world that we want to live into, and that we address in our own personal lives and in the organizations that we build issues of white supremacy and issues of racism. Because if we don't do it on our own, how can we call out the administration and those who perpetuate such abhorrent policies? We can't. We have no moral basis to do that. So we need to be at work, forming through conversations, through one-on-one conversations, through building power, through common alliances with people that share our same visions, our same goals. We need to articulate what those goals are. We need to be in conversation with one another. We need to welcome new people, welcome especially younger people who have even greater goals than we could possibly even imagine. And then we need to lay out what those visions and what those goals are, and then we need to work strategically to address them. That is what AU's field department is about. That's what we've been doing in North Carolina. I spent a week there just a few weeks ago, working with other organizations around issues of gerrymandering. That's what we came here, I guess it was 2 or 3 months ago, and we did training here with Midwest Academy. That's what we want to do throughout Texas. That's what we want to do across the country. So we're very, very happy. I'm very happy to be here. I actually grew up north of Dallas and served in churches out in West Texas. So it's good to be back. It's good to see that Houston is rising up again. I've seen a lot of, even just the day I've been here, I've seen a lot of commercials about Houston Strong, and that's really, really been encouraging to see. But thank you guys. Thank you so much for allowing us to use your church. Thank you for your work. And let's work together so that we can, so that we're not just simply shaking our heads, right? So that we're not just simply saying, making jokes about Trump, which we will because they're fun. But that we're doing more than that. We're actually building communities of power and strength and vision that welcome new people into them and that truly do and effectively counter the visions that we see that are emanating from the White House and from even Austin. So thank you all very, very much.
Before we take questions and answers from the audience, I have the privilege of making a presentation to Reverend Lynn that I don't think he knows about. You have heard sort of maybe discouraging things about the past, a little bit of concern about the present, but hopefully, based on what Bill Medford just said, some hope for the future. As Bill said, the future of the organization is in good hands. We're indebted to Barry Lynn for what he's accomplished, but it's in good hands because of people like him and some of the other people. And I think the quality of the staff is a tribute to Barry Lynn, because the Director of Communications has been at AU for 30 years. Barry's assistant has been there for 14 years. The head of the legislative department has been there for 12 years. These are people who obviously are there because they're passionate about their work, but also they are nurtured by an executive director who gives them the encouragement, the guidance, and the freedom to do what they want to do. He has accomplished a lot for the organization. And so, in honor of what he has done, in appreciation of what he has done for Americans United and for all of those who are members of the organization, the Board of Directors of the Houston chapter is very pleased to present, as a gift in recognition of his service to our organization, a check for $1,000 as a donation to the national organization.
Thank you.
And we invite anyone else who wants to follow our lead. Doesn't have to be $1,000, but whatever gift you feel that you can make. If you appreciate what Reverend Lynn has done for the organization and for the cause, again, this is a cause that transcends more than just a narrow issue. This is a cause that affects many issues that are important to you, such as education, such as equality, as I mentioned previously, and as he mentioned. So we invite you, if you would like, to make a tribute gift in Barry Lynn's name. We do have volunteers who are seated out there who will help you make the donation. If you want to make it electronically, that's probably the easiest way to do it. We'll be set up to make the donation, so you can make the donation directly to our national office, or if you prefer to give cash or check, we're here to help you do whatever you would like to do. And of course, if there's anybody out here who hasn't joined Americans United and would like to do that tonight, it's only $25 a year and it's free to students. We'll be happy to take your membership donation as well. Now, anybody have some questions?
Yes.
What is the status of identifying a successor?
I'm having a little trouble.
Speak up.
What's the status of finding a successor for you since you're retired?
It's still an active, ongoing search, and I believe that we're looking at the board is looking at some very fine people right now, so that will happen. That will happen. Yes.
Thank you so much for being here. And I'm looking forward to Wally James interviewing you Thursday night on 90.1 FM. So I'm looking forward to that.
Okay.
And thank you very much for Mr. Boswell for setting them up. My question is, do we have many churches that are still getting federal money or governmental money for having drug and alcohol rehab kind of programs through churches?
The question is, are we still having a lot of churches getting a lot of federal money for things like drug rehab? And the answer is yes. 2 weeks ago, one Friday, Jeff Sessions, the former Alabama senator, announced that you can obtain federal funds even if in your secular programs that are receiving government dollars, our dollars, you can hire preferentially, which means you can discriminate in hiring. You can literally, thanks to the comments of the Attorney General of America, you can now put up a sign that says no Unitarians need apply for a job that is fully federally funded, that is ostensibly for a secular thing like drug counseling or feeding the hungry. This is something the Obama administration could have done a little more about, but didn't for a variety of reasons, and now it's unraveling completely. So any ad that you see that says a program is in a church, if it's partially federally funded or entirely federally funded, they can hire only people just like themselves, who think like themselves, who look like themselves, and this is a major setback to the civil rights of every American. This was done on exactly the same day that President Trump issued an executive order about women's contraceptive access. This means that as of 2 weeks ago, any company in this country, religious, secular, or otherwise, that has a religious or moral objection to providing insurance for contraception can merely assert that this is what they believe, and they will no longer be required to provide those insurance coverages for American women. This is what Hobby Lobby did. Tens of thousands of American women working for them. A 5-4 decision of the United States Supreme Court that didn't go our way. Hobby Lobby, I'm sure you have it here. Somebody put me up in some place a few months ago right across the street from a Hobby Lobby. They didn't have to worry that I was planning to shop there, though. And this is a closely held family corporation. Corporation's board said we don't approve of 4 kinds of contraception. They were allowed to ignore covering that for the tens of thousands of women employees in the company. We represent several students at Notre Dame University, direct representation, the only organization that does directly represent any women who have lost insurance benefits for contraception, and we will continue to represent them. Whether any case will get to the Supreme Court now, we don't know. But in one day, 2 Fridays ago, this administration allowed discriminatory hiring with government money and allowed any company in this country, not just a religious organization, any company, the right to say we have an objection on religious or moral grounds to providing contraception coverage. We're not going to do it. That was about as bleak a day as we've had in the modern history of separation of church and state. This radical redefinition of what religious liberty is. Religious liberty does not mean you get a chance of an opportunity to impose your religion on everybody else. It is you can speak about it, you can practice it, unless it runs into a legitimate right of someone else, but you don't have a right to get funded for discriminatory beliefs about religion and how it affects other human beings. You just don't. And this administration doesn't get that.
Given that you laid out very clearly that this is a different type of administration that tries to undermine fundamental institutions, and that the base of the administration is using different means than maybe past administrations, such as digital forums and things like that, to push a very heavily racist, theocratic message, I would ask, is Americans United nationally finding strategies to respond to that? And how can we as activists and engaged citizens avoid fighting the last war, so to speak?
Yeah, I think it's important that we understand that we're not just fighting the last war. I mean, I was in Berkeley, California. We have this series of concerts we do with a lot of songwriters and comedians who like what we do and offer their services. And we were at a place called the Freight and Salvage, if you grew up in Berkeley. And when I'm out there, when we're doing one of these benefits, I usually say something at the intermission. And I mentioned at the intermission that I'd been walking around Berkeley where my daughter went to college. But I used to go there a lot and walk around, and it has that vibe, It just, the music's good, everything's good. I kind of felt nostalgic for the 60s. And then I said, though, at my little intermission speech, I said, I'm starting to feel nostalgic, not just for civil rights progress and peace progress, but I'm starting to feel a little nostalgic for Richard Nixon. There was a gentleman in the front row with a really long beard, long gray hair. He seemed to really get into it. It turned out he was Wavy Gravy. Does that name mean anything? If you tried to go to Woodstock, he was one of the announcers and kind of a long-standing icon of the American progressive movement. And he gave me $300 check. I guess it's okay. You can be on the edges of society for decades, and maybe you have enough to give me $300. But I am with these people. The difference, Ronald Reagan, George Bush, George W., these people, they had people on their staff you could actually talk to. You know, Andy Card, who was the chief of staff at the White House, you could actually talk to him. He was kind of an, if I can use the word, normal human being. There's nobody in this administration that is like that. So you have to come up with ways to just confront that. You can't play games with these people. Steve Bannon has announced that, you know, today he's at war with everybody that's a quote, moderate Republican. Kellyanne Conway, I knew when she was Kellyanne Fitzpatrick. I thought she was always kind of on the edge. Now she's clearly gone off the edge. But these are the people that you have to try to deal with, but you can't. And you have to find ways around them. And this is why it's so important to find the heroes, the people who are willing to commit to doing the right thing all the time. And I think that the two best senators in my life working in Washington, one was Phil Hart. And Phil and Jane Hart were strong opponents of the Vietnam War. And they were very pro-choice when it came to reproductive justice. They were in favor of amnesty for war resistors. And I remember I spoke at a hearing and my wife was with me and she went up to Senator Hart and said, how is it that you can work on all of these issues in the Senate? How can you do this? And he looked at her and he said, you know, sometimes you just have to do what is right. Sometimes you just have to do what is right. So we need more people like that in the loyal opposition to this president, and more people who save the time and the distance to make sure that they're there so that nothing gets pulled over on the rest of America. Yeah.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for your service. I can imagine it's a difficult job. No, I'm a voter, but here lately, the problem I'm having is choosing candidate to vote for. I was wondering, my question is there a person or an organization that will provide a list of candidates to vote for that tells the truth?
There are such organizations, and someone is in the back. Are you with such an organization? You want to give this gentleman a microphone.
Thank you so much. I'm Mike Webb. I'm the Vice President of the Houston GLBT Political Caucus. Indeed. There you go. So we're going to tell you way more about the caucus than I can. Basically, made it, but the Houston GLBT Political Caucus primary purpose is to endorse and screen, most importantly, screen candidates who are running for office. Then we send out a mailer and we hand out endorsement cards at polling locations. That's pretty much help people make decisions who to vote for. And it's a thorough screening process too, so you can trust us.
Yeah. Those are, you know, one of the things we did, started out doing long ago, 25 years ago, was looking at these phony voter guides from right-wing organizations. And I mean phony, meaning, let's say you had a person who was a Republican who was on what the right wing would call the wrong side of an issue. They would not want to admit that in a voter guide. They would literally change the topics that they were measuring from congressional district to congressional district. And this was one of the many things. I remember the worst example was they had some people in the Virginia legislature who were Republicans, but they were a little too progressive. And so they found some vote and decided that they were in favor of bestiality, which is not that popular. But
my question is actually very serious, but I wanted to tell you that this morning I heard the good news on TV that President Trump says that this year we are going to celebrate Christmas because we ended that up. So I wanted to rest assured. My question is
Is AU involved in anything with the Sinclair Broadcast Group? Because as far as I'm concerned, that is one of the scariest things that I've seen happen in recent years.
The Sinclair Broadcast Group has an enormous control over the radio and television stations in many parts of the country. And although radio and television traditionally, traditional sources aren't as important as they used to be, they're still awfully important. And once you have one company that runs, that decides what music you're going to play, decides what broadcast talk shows are going to happen, you're in trouble. And it's very difficult, still possible. It's hard to challenge licenses because they don't, it's not suggesting you do what Trump wants. If you don't like something you hear, you take their license away. But is there a sense, these are community-based stations. They care what the community thinks. If you don't have anything you like, if they never play anything or broadcast anything you don't like, they do want to hear from you. Or they don't want to hear from you, but they will listen to you because you're the same people that are going to buy the groceries and to buy the cars that they advertise on those local stations. So we are not doing anything about that, but it's a very important issue. There are institutions in Washington that are working on that very thing.
But the problem that I see with the Sinclair Group is that they can choose not to broadcast certain news-worthy issues,
right?
Because they have a different agenda.
That's true. There used to be something called fairness doctrine that was really a very, I mean, it didn't say you had to give equal time to everything. It just said if there was a difference of opinion in the community, you had to cover all sides. There was nothing formulaic about it. I mean, I'm a big First Amendment absolutist, but I never saw the fairness doctrine as intruding on the legitimate First Amendment rights of any broadcaster in this country. But they did away with that.
In 1987.
97?
87.
87, that's right. And you got access, community access channels, but frankly, there are not a lot of people watching those. And we have the internet, and we have all that, but we tend to, we listen to the same stuff that confirms our belief. Go back to something I said at the end. We've got to learn how to argue with them using the arguments they make if we're going to change people's minds.
Reverend Lynn, you mentioned Jeff Sessions a few minutes ago, and it brought to mind the person who's been nominated to take his seat in the Senate, Roy Moore, probably another one of your favorite politicians. And I was wondering if you had any ideas on whether in the next election cycle we'll see a lot of other people like Roy Moore getting the party's nomination to run for Senate and House.
Roy Moore we sued twice. First when they put up a 2.5-ton granite monument in the judicial building down in Montgomery, Alabama. He refused to take it down. We won the suit. He refused to take it down. He said at that time what he said the second time we had to sue him, that the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court of the United States does not apply in the state of Alabama. We had to do the same thing. We represented 3 couples that wanted to get marriage licenses in 2 different counties in Alabama. One Sunday night, Roy Moore, as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court back down there, he had been re-elected to that position after we had him fired. He announced that clerks could not, under any circumstances, sign same-sex marriage licenses. And an astonishing percentage of clerks in the state of Alabama decided they would listen to their boss and refused. And we won that case too. You can beat those people if you have a judiciary that is what you can be. I believe you can be conservative and still have common sense. I don't think a lot of these people do. Will there be more? I think Steve Bannon wants to take out, you heard it on the news, Mitch McConnell. I'm not a friend of Mitch McConnell. But yeah, there's going to be that. But here's the good news, is there are a lot of people running for the House of Representatives who are scientists, because they got so mad at the anti-science bent in the Congress right now and in this administration. More people run, more voices get heard. I think people, unless we totally do away with public schools and voting rights, there are going to be more options than we've ever seen when it comes to these midterm elections. And I'm never telling anybody who to vote for, but I think if you go to the organizations that do legitimate voter guides, and in many communities, frankly, the League of Women Voters, they do a good job. It's going to make a big difference. So I do expect them to run in primaries. I expect some of them will get through, but I also think there are a lot of good people who are coming from the woodworks and the other places of hiding that are going to be running for elective office at every level. And we need to know who they are, and we need to look at what they believe, and then we need to get people registered and take them to the polls to vote. Hey, thanks for the questions. And I didn't have to make up any answers because they're good questions. It's not always true.
I know we could all listen to Reverend Lynn the rest of the night, but I invite you to go, as I say, go to the reception, enjoy the refreshments, and mingle with us there. One more thing I did forget to mention, though, if you are considering making a donation to Americans United, again, this will go to the national office, in honor of Reverend Lynn, we have 2 copies of his most recent book, God and Government. And I'm sure that for a donation of $50 or more, he will be more than happy to autograph it to you personally. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it.